We're here now, and the star man of the day is Mr. Roberto Artavia Loría. And we're here today to explore how SBI has been used to measure the impact of tourist industry around Costa Rica and to discuss its potential future role in policy making in Iceland and around the world. Tourism is one of the fastest growing economy sectors in the world, and its impact has been very much felt in Iceland, and it's been dominating the discussion here over the last seasons and will continue to be so. So Roberto's input will be very interesting for us. Roberto is the vice chair of the board of directors at the Social Progress Imperative, and he holds a doctoral degree in business from Harvard, and also has a long history in the formation of civil society networks in Latin America. Roberto, take it away.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me well? Is it over the speakers? Madam Minister, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here this afternoon. Let me apologize for not dressing up to speak to you, but I had to choose between freezing and dressing down. So I chose to dress down because I tried to come out with my jacket and tie, and I walked 3 steps out of the hotel and ran back in. So you'll have to pardon me for the informality. I want to tell you a little about Costa Rica, and let me just start by saying, Madam Minister, that I don't think there is much that you need to learn after hearing your words here. I think you have a very clear vision of where you need to go. And as you will see, I think we are, as you very well explained, down similar paths. As you can tell, Costa Rica is a very green country, and when I was riding in from the airport, the first tree I saw in Reykjavik, which I found completely upside down. You know, the trees are in town, and your landscape is barren. But I guess that's what makes you unique and special in so many other ways. Let me tell you about 2 things that I think are key and that are going to be at the heart of my presentation, which I reviewed this morning. I will talk about social progress in tourism, but I want to frame it in the overall tourism strategy of Costa Rica and its evolution so that you know why it is so important for us to measure it now and how we're doing it. So let me tell you about the evolution of our tourism model very quickly. Early on, up to 1992, at the time of the Earth Summit in Rio, we were all about beach and sun. I mean, we were receiving tourists who just wanted to lie on the beach and get a lot of sun, enjoy the ocean, and enjoy the warmth. And we were doing okay with that. As you can see, we were already starting to grow. But in 1992, we decided to go full-fledged into ecotourism. Come to enjoy our nature, whitewater rafting, rappelling, zip lining, I mean, anything and everything you can imagine, bike riding. Use our resources to enjoy yourself, to do your sport, to exercise your creativity using our base of resources. And that went very well. As you can tell, growth continued. By 2000 the year 2000, we moved into sustainable tourism. That already meant that we had not only to enjoy nature, but we started to create value added from nature. And 2 important things happened here. First of all, we became a brand for sustainable tourism globally. And that means that when you buy coffee from Costa Rica, a lot of times it is pushed by tourists who have already been to Costa Rica. When you go into a store in the United States, into a Starbucks, and you look for Tarrazú coffee as one of the prime brands or prime blends of coffee that you can buy, it's because literally millions of tourists have already experienced that in Costa Rica and are using it. So the one thing that changed here in sustainable tourism, aside from the fact that we moved to what we call come to belong, you're now part of the dynamics of sustainability in our country, is the fact that we were selling you the entire country and not just the tourist destinations. The type of things that we were doing here is agricultural tourism. It was no longer about going to the beach. It was no longer about jumping from one tree to the next. It was about experiencing our farms, our people, our communities, our way of life much more directly. And we're now moving in this last stage, starting in 2012, 2013, to what we call experiential tourism. Live, learn, and share. And the idea is that we're moving up in the scale to hire more sophisticated tourists. Our marketing is in California and New England, in Holland, Germany, Great Britain, France. It is no longer for surfers, it is for tourists that will demand a high level of experience in terms of their culinary experience, in terms of the availability of good wineries, for example, in terms of excellence in coffee, in terms of excellence in transportation. And the idea is that we want to very quickly top the number of tourists coming into the country without sacrificing the growing income. And that means tourists that will stay longer, that will pay more for an experience. Will that have impact on our local costs? Yes, it might. Will that have impact on the dynamics of tourism? We hope so. We hope that it'll become more a destination where you go to learn, where you go to expand your vision, to understand sustainability, to interact with society in a more deep way, in a deeper way. We do surveys at the airport and at the ports when people are leaving the country, and 63% of the tourists in Costa Rica say that the main reason they enjoyed the experience is because of the contact with the people. And you go to meet Costa Ricans. They will hug you, they will touch you, they're very Latin in their ways, but they're also, because the country is relatively equitable compared to other Latin countries, they're also very confident in their communication with one another. And the experience they give the tourist is not one of servitude, is one of establishing personal relationships, of talking to you at a nice level. And that has become what we call come to experience the country in every possible way. Also, in this continuity that we have had, we have always been doing planning. We do planning every 4 years with the Ministry of Tourism, formal planning. We're always focusing on innovation, differentiation. This is about how are we different from Guatemala, from Ecuador, from Peru, from Mexico, from the destinations that are naturally competitive with us. What is the difference in our offer? How do we separate from them? And of course, positioning. And positioning is have a brand that is recognized for a number of attributes which people can actually identify. Sustainability, social equity, value added, a good experience, learning experience. Those are the factors of positioning and differentiation that we want to enhance more and more today. This happens because we have been working on this strategy for the past 20 years. The first time we launched this joint strategy between the public sector, the private sector, and academia in Costa Rica was in 1996. 4 ministers have been appointed who were previously chairpersons of the Chamber of Tourism. So there is really a public-private alliance going on in this area. And of course, there's 2 sectors in the country in which public-private alliances have yielded great results over time. Tourism and investment attraction for high value-added manufacturing and services. You come to Costa Rica and you will see huge free zones with the likes of Hewlett-Packard, Intel, McKinsey, and others, which are adding value, again, not by selling cheap labor, but really by adding knowledge, analysis of information, etc. And therefore, the continuity in our relationship with globalization has 2 legs. Tourism on the one hand, which is our brand, our image. Remember that each time that a plane leaves, there is people on top, but the belly holds cargo. And we have put the 2 together. Every time we establish a route, a tourism route, we're already talking to the Ministry of Exports to see what are we going to put in the belly of that plane. So that tourism is also a fostering system for the manufacturing and export dynamics of the country as well. And these 2 sectors have not only worked together, but really have been the engines for growth in the country for the past 25 years. We have some guiding principles in our planning. The idea is that we want to be an industry in which its players understand and work for sustainability. In our mind, that means that we have to create a lot of value added, economic value added, higher prices, higher margins, better cost structure, higher productivity, work on that constantly. But at the same time, we want to measure the social value that is created in the industry. And this is why the social progress measurement became so important. And of course, in order for this to work, this has to be way higher. That's why this is a big sign than the opportunity cost of the national resources, human and natural, and the environmental footprint. So we need to make sure every time we make an investment, we assign a cluster, we assign a strategy, we measure it in terms of its economic value, its social value, and it needs to overcome and be much higher than the opportunity cost of its resources and the environmental footprint that it leaves. And only then do we know that we are making a good investment. If you came tomorrow with a hotel investment to Costa Rica and say, I want to invest, I don't know, $200 million in this resort, we would use this formula to see if we want your hotel there in the first place. The other thing is that we understand that the world is always changing. Consumer practices, consumer preferences, security, geopolitical context, new technologies, disruptive technologies, etc. I mean, there's so much going on in the world today. And we know that what we're trying to do is affect investment decisions by investors, large and small, in the system. The strategies, we're trying to affect the strategies and practices of organizations and communities. And again, this is where social progress becomes so important. Each community that hosts a tourism cluster has to have a positioning, an idea of how it's going to generate value, which is higher than the resources it uses. And consumer behavior and preferences, we're also trying to influence those. Our positioning today is to provide unique environmental and social experiences to each visitor. And what we do is we look at the institutions, the laws and the regulations, the programs and incentives, the necessary infrastructure, the availability of human capital, the technology that we need in place, and even the alignment of economic and credit policies. And we need to know that these are well aligned in order for us to achieve the objective given the dynamics of the context and the preferences of investors, consumers, and organizations in terms of productivity. This alignment is fundamental. For example, the National Biodiversity Institute of Costa Rica is a scientific organization, but it does have one program to train biologists to become tour operators, because every biologist in the country needs to be aware of the resources, so that if they meet a tourist or if they become an operator themselves, they can identify the tree, the species of insect, the species of snake, or whatever it is that they come in contact with. So biologists in Costa Rica actually take tourism classes as part of their university formation. If you are in culinary training, if you want to become a chef in Costa Rica, it used to be that we trained them almost linearly to be similar to whatever you did in Europe or elsewhere. Now we're talking about using our fruit, using our vegetables, healthier diets, low-calorie diets, less red protein, etc., to make sure that it responds to the changing practices of consumers. So the alignment here needs to be true, and each one of these programs, institutions, infrastructure needs to be aligned with the objective that we want to pursue. So imagine, it's great. You charge $50 for a salad. It's perfect. You serve lettuce, and they pay you $50 for it. It's like the perfect margin generator, and it's actually value added for that consumer. So this is what we're trying to find. What are the niches in which our positioning, our image really fits well? Of course, we need to be successful in other areas. These are the international arrivals into Costa Rica by air and by sea. And as you can tell, this is growing significantly, the number of cruise ships coming into the country. This you need to be careful with. We actually measure the impact of cruise ships very carefully, because cruise ships generate, at the same time that they generate incoming tourists, which spend relatively high in the 1 day or day and a half that they spend in the country. The crews are also sources of drug trafficking, prostitution, and waste. They bring a lot of waste that needs to be managed by the country, and therefore you need to be careful in how you regulate the incoming cruise ships into your country and make sure that they become a positive force and not a negative one. These are international arrivals by point of origin. As you can tell, North America remains the largest. The dotted line is the United States by itself. Central America is second, and again, we are a source of tourism. I find this absolutely ridiculous, but Central Americans come to Costa Rica for tourism when they have better resources than we have, with the exception of El Salvador. But again, it's marketing and positioning. Europe is starting to grow in an interesting way, And South America, although it is growing, is not really a target for us. South Americans look for low-cost tourism. I mean, you go to Orlando and you will see a Brazilian or Argentinian walking with a flag with 200 Brazilians behind them. That's not the tourism that we want. We want the people who are going to come to learn, to share, to live the experience, and to be willing to pay handsomely for it. This is another important achievement of our process. The median stay in days is now up to 12 days, which is second in the world to New Zealand, which is very unusual. In Costa Rica, this is high success, and I'll explain how we got to it. But the interesting thing is that New Zealand is easy to explain. You go way the hell down there, you might as well stay a long time. You don't go to New Zealand overnight. But Costa Rica is 2.5 hours from Miami, 4 hours from New York, 4.5 hours from LA. So potentially you could go there for just a few days and actually have a nice experience. So how have we increased this? The fact is that we never sell a destination. We never tell you, come to the volcano, or come whitewater rafting, or come to the mountain. We tell you, come to Costa Rica and enjoy the whole country. And we sell you packages in which you will go to the mountains, you will go to the beaches, you will go to the volcanoes, you will go to the jungles, because the country is sold as an integrated unit that really needs to be exploited and explored as one. And you know what's the interesting thing? In this growth of our tourism, of us as a tourism destination, 30% of tourists are repeats, people who come back over and over. So it seems that even though we're this integral destination, it's worth coming back for them. And this is very important because this is a level of expenditure, obviously, relative to each tourist. If you are a family of 4, here we're talking probably $4,800 to $5,000 investment by that family in 12 days of stay. That's significant, and that's what we're looking for. As a matter of fact, this is the growth of income. We're up to $2.9 billion, which is not that high, you might say. Remember that Costa Rica is a poor country, a poor tropical country. So this is by far the largest industry in the country now. And here we're measuring only the direct value added. We're not measuring the exports that go in the planes in the bellies of the planes. We're not measuring the coffee that we sell with touristic brands and all the other value added that tourism actually has. How is the touristic dollar distributed? This is very important, and we'll go back to the idea of social progress again. If we had just JW Marriott and a Four Seasons, and all the dollars went there, then all this effort wouldn't make any sense. The fact is that geographically, tourism is all over the country, along the coasts, borders, and also in the mountain ranges. These are 28 stars, which are the currently operating tourism clusters of the country. We now have 34 altogether, counting cities, airports, and others. And those 34 clusters is what where we're measuring social index now. And diversity of pockets, because as I said, we do have a Four Seasons and a JW Marriott and an Andaz and a Dreams, but we also have this little guy here who is renting out his horses and making a living out of it. And believe me, he has learned. It used to be that you could literally rent a horse for about 25 cents an hour. If you go to the Four Seasons now and you go to the neighboring town and you rent a horse, you're going to pay $10 an hour for that horse. So it's really changing the dynamics of investment, of entrepreneurship, of growth in the country. And to take advantage of this positioning, we have decided that we want to enter three new market segments. And of course, this is traditional Costa Rica. I mean, this is what you came to Costa Rica for before. You know, by the way, this is a true picture. It's called Megalephis costarricensis. Apparently, it only exists in Costa Rica, and they don't do anything, but they're scary. But anyway, Costa Rica has been a big bird watching destination for years. There are more species of birds in the jungles of Costa Rica than in all of North America combined, and we're only 50,000 square kilometers. I mean, the diversity is really, really fantastic. Very importantly, and I wanted to highlight this, bicycle race from the Pacific to the Caribbean coast. This race will have its 25th anniversary next year, in 2018. For 25 years, we have had an international bicycle race that starts in the Pacific, goes to the Atlantic. This is a scene from that. And you can imagine the rivers that they have to cross, the jungles that they have to cross, supposedly in a bicycle or with a bicycle on their shoulders, as the case may be. And this is another experience. This is Caminos de Osa, which is, I'll show you in the map in a second, in one of the deepest jungles in our country. This is the entrepreneur, young entrepreneur, but he has trained all these people who are local people to become tour guides through the jungle. And you see, he has no machete, he has no gun. This guy would probably be mining for gold or extracting valuable woods if he was not working in tourism. So we have really, literally managed for him to create value and to find a living out of tourism. But it means that we need people who have understanding of the global trends and the investment dynamics to come in and help the locals actually adapt their touristic offer, their service offer, their capabilities to the dynamics of the sector. We have hundreds of high differentiation, high value-added boutique hotels. Of course, we also have the Four Seasons with a huge golf course, and the JW Marriott with a huge golf course. And there are many people still coming to Costa Rica to play 3 rounds of golf and go back. Of course, a tee-off in one of those hotels will probably cost you $260, and a night will probably cost you $500 to $800 a night. So that's fine with us if they want to continue doing that. But this is what Costa Rican hotels more and more look like. It's about boutique hotels, it's about jungle hotels, it's about experiencing the life of the country in a deep way. And one of the interesting things going on right now is that Airbnb is growing very fast in rural areas, which is fine, but it expands, again, the segmentation, because we were moving up. You know, a room here will cost you $400 a night, but if you go to Airbnb and you're a surfer, you can go still for, I don't know, $30, $40 per day and stay in Costa Rica. I have no problem with that, but again, that is not the target. The target is more the people we can get in this type of places. This is the honeymoon suite at the Pacuare Lodge. I actually went here last May. It's amazing, the quality of the food, the quality of the facilities, the depth of the jungle around it. I mean, it truly is a unique place, and the only way you can get there is whitewater rafting. They actually put your suitcase in a huge garden garbage bag and tie it 20 different ways to the boat. They put you on a boat, and you raft down into the hotel because there is no other way to get there. So again, experience, share, learn, and the whole way the guy is pointing, this tree is probably 400 years old, and it's this and that species, and this monkey you see here, and you really are in complete interaction the whole time. The new segments that we're investing in, one is wellness. And what is wellness? Well, today, if you asked a Costa Rican, the average Costa Rican, they would say it's crazy gringos who come and pay to get bathed in mud. They put hot rocks on top of them, then they clean them with avocado creams, and then they send them home and they pay $1,000 for that. And that's one way to describe it. The fact is that we are actually launching something called Wellness Pura Vida, which is this dynamics of wellness in the diet, in the settings, in the relationship with nature. I mean, these guys are actually meditating around a tree or doing yoga in the gardens of one of our most antique churches in the country. And the idea is that this value-added structure becomes prevalent throughout the system, and it's becoming so more and more. The other segment is conventions 50 to 500. We're not going to do the Las Vegas type conventions of 8,000 to 12,000 people. We couldn't anyway. We simply haven't got the facilities. But Costa Rica is a highly educated. We have the most recognized international schools in Latin America, in business, in tropical agriculture, in biodiversity, and other areas. And we have been historically a mecca for knowledge. So we're going to use that and become, in very small to medium-high conventions, a center. And of course, that requires a new investment in infrastructure. This is actually being built as we speak, something similar to this, a little more tropical in its design, I guess. And this was the good, bad news we received last week. And I say good, bad news because it was kind of interesting. I don't know if you read, but a journalist interviewed me 2 weeks before I came here, and I said, the last thing we need in Costa Rica is a Disneyland. And of course, last week, Discovery Channel announced that they will open an international park in Costa Rica. It's a $1.1 billion investment. And the good thing about it, it's in our lowlands where biodiversity is lowest, where people are poorest. So it's actually a good thing when you look at it that way. And the idea is interesting, is Discovery aims, this is from Bloomberg, to make viewers of their channel tourists with the Costa Rica project. So this is going to be centered about biodiversity, about life, about experiences like Discovery Channel supposedly promotes. So it fits well with what we're doing. We just need to make sure that it doesn't become, you know, a guy with a flag and 200 Brazilians behind him. It needs to be higher value added one way or another. So now, on to social progress. Why was social progress so important for us? Because if you are going to deliver the experience and you're going to make tourism the engine for growth, not only for tourism itself, but also for coffee and bananas and services and all these other things, you really need the people to come on board and to feel that tourism has a positive relationship with them. Let me give you an example. When we meet in a tourism cluster meeting, we usually have like 600 people in a room, and among those 600 people, there will be the cab drivers, the bus drivers, the bakers. This is not only about hoteliers and airlines. It's about bringing everybody who's connected as a supplier to the system. And this means that there is a hydroponic lettuce project next to each hotel, that there's somebody who actually provides laundry services to these boutique hotels, which is part of the tourism cluster. Because these hotels in the middle of the jungle do not have laundries. Their laundry needs to be done elsewhere. And therefore, there needs to be an entrepreneur doing a little chain of laundromats which provide services for boutique hotels. And that we bring in as part of the tourism cluster. You would say, well, isn't that the, I don't know, the detergent value chain? Well, yes, sure. But this, in this case, it would not exist. It would not charge the prices that it does if it wasn't for the tourism clusters. Once you do that, 1 out of every 5 Costa Ricans is connected to the tourism cluster. Working today is connected to the tourism cluster. And in that sense, once you start generating and communicating that effectively and showing that the relationship is in general positive, you change the dynamics of the industry. It starts being seen as an opportunity generator. It starts being seen as an engine for growth and well-being rather than an invasion of blonde people in a country where we all look like me. So you know, it's a different setting. So what are the design principles of the Social Progress Index? And this is very important. We only measure social and environmental indicators. We do not measure anything that deals with economics. What does that mean? Very simply, we will not measure the investment in education. We measure how many people graduate elementary school, high school, technical education, and university. We do not measure the investment in health. We measure longevity, child mortality, maternal mortality, rate of vaccination, or whatever are the outcomes that define each one of the areas in which we want to work. And I'll show you what they are. We only measure indicators of outcome, not of effort, only results, people who graduate, longevity. Those are outcomes. Those are not efforts, those are not lost, those are not drivers. Formal relevance. What does this mean? The model is flexible. We actually go into each community, and the model of SPI will have the same 3 dimensions, and I'll show them to you in a second, the same 12 components, but the indicators we use to measure it might vary from one to the other. For example, we measured it for touristic clusters in Costa Rica. We also measured it for coffee co-ops in Costa Rica. And the model is not exactly the same because the dynamics in each one of those communities are not the same. We make small adaptations to make sure that the relevance is maximum. And of course, they need to be actionable. The idea is that they're conducive to action and not just data. What we're trying to do really is to write a roadmap of actions and social interventions by business, by government, by the communities themselves as much as we can. This is the model of social progress. We have 3 dimensions: the satisfaction of basic human needs, the foundations of well-being. This is the instrumentation and the infrastructure so that each person and family can improve his quality of life, and opportunity, an environment in which each person can reach his or her maximum potential. That's the idea. And the components are nutrition and basic medical care, water and sanitation, shelter, housing, personal safety, access to basic knowledge, access to information and communication so that they can make decisions, health and wellness. This is advanced health and wellness, no obesity, good health, etc. Environmental quality, personal rights, where you can exercise your political rights, your religious rights, your property rights, etc. Personal freedom and choice, where you can choose the way you want to live. Tolerance and inclusion, if you're not discriminated for discapacity, by gender, by race, by religion. And of course, access to advanced education. Do you actually get the knowledge that you need to reach your maximum potential? In the case of tourism, this is measured through 59 indicators divided among the 12 components. And this is the results that we get. It is very important to say that the global SPI is 62.88. And the lowest cluster in Costa Rica here, although the measure is not exactly the same because of that flexibility that I mentioned, is 67.44. So Costa Rica is okay compared to world averages, but when you compare this among themselves, there is a significant gap, more than 10 points, between La Fortuna, which is here, and Puerto Viejo. So you can already imagine we start exploring, okay, what are they doing in La Fortuna that they're not doing in Puerto Viejo? And you can compare, analyze, and use this in practical terms. Again, I won't go into the details of this, but these are some of the key results in the components: nutrition and basic medical care. So this means that touristic clusters have greater access to basic health care than the communities in which they sit. The average area of influence of a touristic cluster has better health access, better water and sanitation, better housing, more personal safety, more access to information and communications, better environmental quality, and access to advanced education. Where have they fallen behind? Apparently, they don't do so well in access to basic knowledge. They do well, but not as well as the county in which they sit. Health and wellness, tolerance and inclusion, personal freedom and choice. This is an interesting one. These two, tolerance and inclusion, has a lot to do with people who are immigrating to the touristic areas and displacing locals from the jobs. So if you don't have adequate technical training that reaches the people who live in these clusters, they will be displaced by somebody coming from the city, and a conflict arises. The same with personal freedom and choice. Who are losing personal freedom? Well, there is more corruption where there are large hotels, for example. They get permits, and they tend to pay bribes and to lubricate the decision-making in the municipality, for example. Or teen pregnancy. The level of both prostitution and unwarranted pregnancy without prostitution increased significantly in many of the touristic areas. So there are dynamics that you really need to look at. Positive impact, 93.8 of tourism is beneficial to the community. This is said by the communities themselves, and they explain it because of the generation of employment, exports, and economic growth in their community. Other impacts, they seem to align social investments, better infrastructure, better health clinic, for example, in touristic areas, focus resources. If you're going to invest in training, it allows you to get a larger portion of the technical training budget if there is large investment in tourism in that area. Coordinate interventions, the corporate social responsibility of companies, which is generally, give them a soccer ball and a uniform for the local high school team, now is focused. For example, there is an important case, Hotel Dreams, which is one of the larger resorts in the northwestern area, actually invested $3.4 million in an aqueduct and a sanitation plant for the community, not just for the hotel. They couldn't imagine having their environment all fixed with a community that literally has no potable water and sanitation around them. So the social responsibility of corporations is better aimed and directed through this. These are, again, the clusters that we measured in the pilot, and this is the counties where they sit. And what you see is, first of all, the mountain clusters tend to do a lot well. The main reason for that is no large resorts, which have a huge environmental footprint, many times uncompensated, and at the same time, the development of the mountain clusters is based on small enterprises, small entrepreneurship, local entrepreneurship, and therefore it creates immediately social progress. In some areas, for example, Papagayo is where the Four Seasons sit. You see that it's green, not as deep green, is this here is the fourth on the list. It does have impact, but because they have made the connections. For example, Four Seasons has a policy with water supply. It has a policy with firemen, with availability of fireman services. And therefore, that benefits the whole community. And therefore, there have been a number of investments that they have made which have had positive impact. This area here, Manuel Antonio, is actually a national park area. It's the most beautiful national park. You actually have the jungle right into the beach. You don't sit under a palm tree. You sit under a 400-year-old huge tropical tree when you're sitting at the beach. It's really, really unique. The thing is, the environmental standards are so high that many of the investments that would contribute to social progress are not allowed because you cannot build a road in the national park, for example. And therefore, it lags a little behind because some of the investments don't make much sense. So you start looking at this and you start analyzing, making your hypothesis about what explains the performance, and you can already start imagining the policies that need to be developed in order to close the gaps between the lowest and the highest on the one hand, but also remember that this is not just a general index, as I am showing you here, and this is, by the way, just a general index. I just wanted to show you that Manuel Antonio and Santa Cruz, which are two large beach resort clusters and a national park, are the two in which the county does better than the cluster. This is a JW Marriott, and this is National Park. Obviously, JW Marriott did very well, but they created a free zone of their own and a buffer zone between themselves and the community, so they're not really impacting the community in any significant way. The other thing is it allows you to identify areas of opportunity. In Manuel Antonio, the 5 areas which are behind where you would expect are shelter, access to basic knowledge, health and wellness, personal rights, tolerance and inclusion. In Puerto Viejo, nutrition and basic medical care, shelter, water and sanitation, and personal rights. Different reasons. Again, this is a national park. In the case of Costa Rica, I am ashamed and embarrassed to say that the indigenous populations under the treaty with the International Labor Organization actually got reserve lands. And they live separate. They have their own land separate from the rest of the community, and therefore the social investments haven't gone at the same level that they go into the rest of the country, and this is what affects Puerto Viejo in particular, where you have a large indigenous population. And then I'm not going to stop here. I just want to show you that you can do it. This is the comparison of shelter, and you can see Manuel Antonio has got a 49.29, Puerto Viejo a 55, Los Santos has got a 91. So you can study here to see what is it that you need to do here. You know, you can start using your data This is access to information and communications. Obviously, Drake Bay is way behind the rest. Well, you need to close this gap, but you already have many examples of how to do it, because this has already happened in similar communities elsewhere. This is, oh, I'm sorry, this is not shelter. This is high access to higher education. And again, you can tell that this is the lowest performance of all indicators. The highest is only 56.96. So it's a gap that we need to close as a country, all of it. But even here, you have a huge gap between the leaders and those lagging behind. So again, you need to identify opportunities for investment. And finally, this is a map of all the indicators in a cluster. You have the basic human needs, you have the foundations of well-being, you have the opportunity, you have the 59 indicators, and you actually have a grade for each one of them. And when you do this, look at this. This is not that it's mismeasured. Literally, only 2.4% of adults have got university or technical training in Drake Bay, which is what we're looking for here. Access to information and communications, everything is in red. It is obviously way behind. There is no way you can operate a tourism cluster if you have no access to internet, to wideband, to a number of things that are now required for reservations, for example. So there are things, this allows you to actually focus on specific areas on which you need to invest to make a difference. So to finish, social progress is not a substitute of measuring economic performance. What we actually want to do is identify what are the tools, the investments, the policies that you need in place in order for your economic progress to become social progress as efficiently as possible. And by creating these conceptual maps, studying the gaps, studying the relationships, benchmarking against one another, you will actually generate many opportunities to improve the way that your economic growth becomes social progress. Iceland, as I understand it, is growing immensely in tourism. I mean, you go from 1.8 to 2.3 million tourists one year to the next. The pressure is enormous. So if all of that income, if it's going to become benefit for the community, having a tool that allows you to identify the best opportunities would make enormous sense. And that's why we're here in the first place. Thank you very much.